Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, Ukraine has become the world's most advanced weapons lab.
Now it's just a total unapologetic arms race to figure out the cheapest, most deadly systems that you could possibly get and mass produce them.
As peace talks inch forward, how the war in Ukraine and its drones have permanently changed the way future wars are fought. I'm Natasha Del Toro, and this is The Take. Hi. Before we continue with today's show, please don't forget to leave us a comment and let us know what you think about today's episode and what stories you want to see us do next. Or if you're listening on the podcast app, let us know where you're listening from. And while you're there, leave us a 5-star review. It helps people find the show.
My name is Ben Makuch. I am a national security reporter, investigative reporter, and I'm currently in Canada.
Well, Ben, welcome to The Take. We're really excited to have you on again. So you recently wrote an article for The New Republic. And I want to start with one scene that you write there. So back in 2023, you're in Kyiv reporting, and a colleague invites you out for a drink, right, at a bar. And you're thinking this is going to be some sort of dive bar, so you show up in muddy boots. But it turns out that is not what this is. This is like some really posh club that's got like this VIP vibe. And you come across a pretty unexpected scene there. Maybe you could take me back to that moment and tell me, what did you see?
Yeah, so the mud on my boots was literally from mud that was from a frontline position or close to a frontline position in Kharkiv. And I'd seen a soldier who clearly had PTSD talking to a tree, probably not 9 hours or 10 hours before walking into that club. And looking across, seeing a kind of middle-aged man, clearly American, and he's dancing with some prettier, younger people. And he looks very familiar. And I turn to somebody and I say, like, that guy looks really familiar. I know him. And they said, oh, yeah, you do. That's Eric Schmidt. And I thought to myself, wow. So that's ex-Google billionaire, ex-Google CEO. Former CEO of Google and billionaire, Eric Schmidt, who's in a key club.
In wartime Ukraine.
And this is almost over a year into the full-scale invasion. And I thought to myself, why is he here?
And he's not the only one that is in wartime Ukraine. You know, you describe this sort of whole cast of characters in your piece. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could tell me a little bit about this crowd that's kind of orbiting Ukraine. You know, name some of the names and tell me what's drawing them there.
So there really is a motley crew of individuals who've gone to Ukraine, mercenaries like Eric Prince, who was the founder of Blackwater, someone like David Petraeus, who was a former director of the CIA and kind of the war on terror general. And then also just kind of these run-of-the-mill Zoomer millennial tech bros from Silicon Valley as well, technologists who've seen sort of the potential wealth in the drone warfare that's been going on there. It's clearly this kind of booming industry that only the front lines in Ukraine are scaling this technology in a way that is both terrifying and in many ways ingenious. And
you have, like you said, Eric Schmidt, the former CEO, billionaire. What is he doing there?
Eric Schmidt's after the same thing. He's after drones. He's created a kind of secretive, semi-secretive company called White Stork, which is trying to merge artificial intelligence software with drone warfare and other kind of trinkets of what will be kind of the next big war. And he's even kind of self-described as an arms dealer now. People in Silicon Valley have always eyed these kinds of places, not only to live out their machismo, but kind of looked at it as, could I be the Lord of War? Which is, a Nicolas Cage movie that's very famous. A lot of them I've talked to have kind of referenced it. I think that there's this sort of fantasy and of course, Ukraine has been sort of a location for that. So that is what's bringing them there. They see opportunity to be the, quote, Lord of War, as you say. And before we get deeper into why Ukraine is drawing all of these characters, maybe you could talk to me a little bit about
this drone warfare and what it actually looks like right now. The way you describe it in your article, it sounds like this sort of dystopian video game from hell.
Well, it's terrifying. I think that's the best way to put it. I mean, tanks wear these kind of crazy barbed cages as hats. Whole highways and roads are covered in enmeshed in nets to prevent drones from flying in.
The soldiers here call it the tunnel of life. They're trying to cover as much of the town as they can in nets.
We know that these nets aren't going to hold up a heavy drone. They'll punch a hole in the net, but at least they'll be slowed down. Most likely, they won't hit their target.
The constant buzzing and clack, clack, clack of anti-drone gunfire and anti-drone missile fire is constant. I should also add that this is not even just on the front lines. I mean, I spent a lot of time in Kyiv for what ended up being some of the largest aerial barrages of the entire war. So it included missiles and drones, including Shahed drones, which are these kind of slow-moving smart missiles that the buzzing sound of them is truly terrifying. And I know that many listeners have probably heard that in Gaza, this is sort of a constant sound, and it really is as well at night in Ukraine, in places like Kyiv, but also on the front lines. So it mixes sort of the horror of medieval warfare with the sadism of video games, in that it's so deeply personal and impersonal with the way that people are dying. And this accounts for 70 to 80 combat deaths in Ukraine right now on both sides.
70 to 80% of combat casualties, which, I mean, that's a drastic increase since the start of the war, right? How much more capable is this new generation of drones than what we saw at the start of the war in 2022?
The innovation has been staggering. At the beginning of the war, the weapon, the choice weapon, the patron saint of Ukraine was the Javelin shoulder-fired anti-tank missile system, because you had Ukrainian special forces going and knocking out these armed convoys of Russian tanks and BMPs and armored vehicles, and it completely kind of disassociated the Russian militaries from doing what they could do. And then, the front lines started to slow down. They started to kind of concretize. And somebody figured out that you could use FPV drones to fly into either people, other soldiers, or into these vehicles.
FPV stands for?
First person view drone. So literally what you could see at a Home Depot. So really kind of like over the counter systems that have then been retrofitted either with explosives, or I've even seen like knives on them, and being able to produce these things at such a rate, it's an easy click.
And cheap to produce.
Cheaply, it's a perfect, asymmetric weapon, which is to say it's something that can even the playing field for a force like Ukraine, which is vastly outnumbered.
This is one of Ukraine's new big drones. It's called Nemesis. It can travel up to 30 kilometers. Under the cover of darkness, the operators use the infrared camera to find targets behind enemy lines and drop bombs on them. Rather than radio-based communications, it has a Starlink internet connection.
There are factories that are underground in places all over Ukraine, including Western Ukraine and in Kyiv, apparently, that are producing thousands of these things a day.
They're put together like toys, with care and precision, fitted with parts, programmed and customized to hunt, intercept and kill. They're made as quickly as possible to meet demand from the front. Starting as volunteers making 100 a month, they're now producing 1,000 times that.
And I think Russia is still winning this. They're still advancing at a very slow pace, but the reason they can't go forward as fast as they wish they could is because of drones.
Let me ask you, I remember, the sort of ethical debate around drones became a lot more mainstream during the Obama years. You had questions, legitimate questions around remote killing, harm that this would produce to civilians, even just like who bears responsibility for decisions made from afar when you have like a drone operator in a bunker who's killing someone far away. Are people still having that debate?
That debate is, I think, and I've been at this long enough to know back in 2014 when like the killer robots movement was happening, and reporting on it. If it's happening, nobody I know in any military is really discussing it and cares, because now it's just a total unapologetic arms race to figure out the cheapest, most deadly, war-tested systems that you can possibly get and mass produce them. And I think at high levels of the government, we're talking in the White House, any discussion, or at the Pentagon, any discussion of this is completely gone out the window. And by the way, this is both administrations. I don't think it's just under Trump or the former Biden administration.
But what about in Ukraine? I mean, where this is all happening? Are you hearing this conversation taking place there, or among the military?
No. Where I hear the actual debate happening, and not so much a debate, there are many drone operators who've come out and talked about the PTSD and the pain that they felt from dropping these bombs and killing so intimately. There's a supercut, I've seen, there's probably more than one at this point, of kamikaze FPV drones flying into the faces of Russian soldiers and then grimacing their last grimaces and dying.
Oh my gosh.
And obviously the Russians are doing the same thing. I mean, the Russians are doing that for killing civilians in Ukraine. But I've heard drone pilots talking about the psychological trauma. And I think that's something that, if there is a killer robots discussion, is coming from that, which is really sad.
And Ben, why are these drones evolving so quickly in Ukraine?
The real reason for that is you have two kind of near peer powers, which is to say two armies which are kind of about the same strength. I would say Russia is very much stronger, but Ukraine is a national military that's being backed by NATO. So when those two powers are clashing, whatever they're using from any manner of warfare, you're going to learn a lot from it. You have a lot of data coming from it, figuring out what kinds of drones work on certain types of systems or targets, how many drones you need for them, which ones you need for surveillance, which ones you need for as kamikazes. There's just so many questions there. And that data, those data points are happening, thousands of times a day. A lot of these drones, all of them have cameras. So you're seeing what angle something gets hit at, how many times it gets hit at, what weather conditions work best, what time of day, all of these things. So all of these data points are being recorded and being gathered by the Ukrainian military, in fact.
So this is like ChatGPT, right? Like the more info that they're getting, the better that they're becoming. Just like, they're feeding information into this large language model and improving the technology in real time.
In fact, that was exactly how it was explained to me by one of these kind of technologists who's gone to Ukraine. He said, ChatGPT is successful because of that. It has tons of data. We have all the data of war, of modern war, to figure out what you need to do and how you need to automate it.
Is there something about Ukraine in particular, this Ukraine war, that makes it the ideal setting for developing this type of technology?
Yes. I mean, I think in comparison to like the genocide in Gaza, there was no fight back. I mean, there was, but it wasn't to the extent that Ukraine is doing. Because Ukraine is a national military that's able to sort of pool resources from tons of different people and themselves, this huge landmass. So when you have that type of clash, the way I put it is, it's very reminiscent of the Spanish Civil War. A lot of fighter jets were being tested there on both sides, Soviets and the Wehrmacht and the Nazi regime. And we're seeing that here. We're seeing Iranian drones go up against American drones. Shaheds that's the system that came from Iran.
Gotcha.
Originally. So this is a national massive war, and it's truly, and I don't say this in a positive way. It's the perfect microcosm, the perfect testing ground for a bigger war that could happen in the future, which is something that a lot of sources and defense people I've spoken to kind of talk about in this casual way now, which is in reference to a possible World War III that will involve various powers against each other.
More with Ben after the break. So, Ben, let's go back to the investors and the outsiders that you mentioned a little bit earlier, the founders, the coders, defense contractors, and, billionaires like Eric Schmidt. What are the dangers of weapons development happening at these startup speeds with this kind of gold rush energy that you've been describing? And should their presence in Ukraine worry us?
Right now, you have the Silicon Valley billionaires who are clearly have an eye on this. And I think, they have an eye on our entire society right now. Mm-hmm. And I think in warfare, a lot of the money being funneled into this and into drone warfare comes from like the classic Lockheed Martins and Raytheons. But also, like I said, you've got Eric Schmidt. Elon Musk even talked about it.
The current war in Ukraine is very much a drone war already. It's sort of a contest between Russia and China to see who can deploy the most number of drones. Now, if there's a major power war, it's very much going to be a drone war.
I think when you see the most powerful people in the world, or the billionaire class, who are vastly interested in profiting off of death, we should all kind of think about this in a very careful way, because just as you've seen sort of these ICE raids that have happened all over the United States, what they're doing was pioneered in the War on Terror, and it came back to the United States.
You were mentioning the ICE raids just because people are being tracked with data?
Being tracked with surveillance, even to the way that they're tracking people down with small units of ostensibly our soldiers and taking people off the street. This includes intelligence to make that happen. All that was very much, and I'm not the only person or reporter who said this, was pioneered in the War on Terror, and how, U.S. forces would capture individuals on the streets of Baghdad or on the streets of Afghanistan. I mean, there's nothing to say that this godlike power of drones that could be created. And we're talking, there are people saying there could be so many drones being able to be created at once. It's like rain. That's explosive and can be controlled. But when that happens, who can stop that?
I'm thinking as we are having this conversation too, like it's easy to get kind of swept up in the thrill of new technology. But there have been massive casualties in this war so far. I know that estimates vary, but military estimates suggest that there have been, I think, 1 million casualties on the Russian side and something like 400,000 on the Ukrainian side as well.
It really is at a World War II scale, or at least close to World War II scale fighting. I mean, the other thing I should add is that both sides, it's kind of been accepted that both sides are lying. We don't know exactly how many both sides have lost.
Right.
So, yeah, you're right. I mean, this is the cost of human life to this. The cities that I've seen before in Ukraine that have been leveled. It's horrifying. And I think that if you take the average Ukrainian off the street and ask them, about this war, the one thing they will say, I would say at least 80% of them will say, I do not want to be a part of an imperial Russian government. And it's not just out of outside of influence. And because of that, millions of people are affected and are casualties of it.
Well, let's then look at what is happening in the present moment right now. The U.S. is really pushing for a peace deal. And there's a sense that this war may end soon. But the way that drones have evolved over the course of this war, it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere anytime soon. So how do you see that what's happening right now is going to shape the future of war?
Already, we're seeing video. I've seen several videos of cartels in Mexico killing each other by using an FPV drone and dropping a mortar round onto, an enemy target. You're already seeing kamikaze drones being used by or in Myanmar, for example, in that civil war, that conflict. You're seeing it in Colombia by the ELN. You're seeing it in Sudan between both forces. So, and also, not to mention the export of these guys in Ukraine who have this skill. There's a high likelihood, if all wars of the past are to dictate, that those guys are going to go out and contract their skills elsewhere, both on the Russian and Ukrainian side. But this has completely changed all of war. I mean, this will never be the same again. It will literally come down to how we train infantrymen, how they create defensive positions. Everything will have changed. And even just talking about a potential ceasefire or a peace negotiation, people in the industry who are selling these drones, who have these drones, these systems, they said to me, they're like, I'm not worried about what's going to happen. This war ends. I'm still in business. If there's a ceasefire, all along those borders, there will constantly be surveillance drones and killer drones to make sure that if anything happened, there will be a response and they will be ready. So, and not to mention, Poland is on a 4.5% GDP spend. They think they're going to war with Russia at some point soon. All of Europe is kind of rearming. So this is just not going anywhere.
Yeah. I mean, the U.S. government seems to be very aware that it's pretty behind when it comes to drones. Dan Driscoll, who is the U.S. point person in the ongoing Ukraine peace talks, also known as Trump's drone guy, who said in a speech in October, quote, "Our window to change is right now, and we will win with silicon and software, not our soldiers' blood and bodies." So what happens then when the U.S. and other countries start catching up and getting their hands on this technology? I mean, you started just describing already what some of those scenarios could look like. You mentioned World War III. What would that look like?
Well, not to scare your listeners and viewers, but there's already intelligence that suggests China has already made millions of these drones that they're going to deploy if there's ever a war. So I think if you look at the United States circling around this technology, the United States is the greatest military force in human history. It's a killing machine. And they will scale this technology at an industrial pace never seen before in human history, and will be ready for whatever conflict arises next. And I think, as I said, a lot of people I've spoken to in these circles kind of see it as an inevitability that there will be a global conflict like World War III with China. And sadly, some people I've spoken with on the ground in Ukraine have said to me that if this peace deal happens in sort of the current form, they think it's just a breather. And I think that that's probably likely. And I think it'll be, a year of mass production of weapons. I think in all types of weapons, but chiefly drones.
I hate to leave an episode there. It's a really
You brought
tough,
me on for the sunshine episode.
That's a really tough place to leave this conversation, Ben. I mean, how do you live with this knowledge? You've been reporting on all of this for years now, and you've been watching this technology develop at warp speed. So how are you sort of living with that information?
Well, as pessimistic as I sound, I do believe in people. I think the one thing I could say in my travels everywhere, people are the same. They want the same things. They want to be able to be with their families. They want to be able to live a life and have access to things like healthcare and happiness. And I think hopefully whatever happens in the future, even if it is the cataclysm that it possibly could be, I'm hoping there's corrective forces and people that are like that. And I choose to believe that there are out there. And I hope that, again, it will end in a way that we aren't all, smoldering under the blankets of nuclear strikes.
Oh, let's leave it right there. Ben, thank you so much for your reporting. I know you've put yourself really on the front lines to bring us all this information. So thank you so much for coming on The Take.
Yeah, thank you for having me.